Welcome everybody to the regular meeting of the Planning Commission for Thursday, November 12th. This meeting is now called to order. And I'll ask if we can take a roll call of the commissioners present tonight, please.
Commissioner Davidson? Not here. Commissioner Hill?
Here.
Commissioner Lubomirsky? Commissioner Pervitali?
Here.
Commissioner Saudi?
Here.
Vice Chair Samudzi?
Here.
And Chair Mercado?
Here.
One absent. Commissioner Davidson.
All right, next we'll move on to the order of the agenda. Are there any changes to the order of the agenda? Nope. Okay. So next we'll move on to the meeting procedures. And due to the COVID-19 shelter-in-place order, we've had to establish new ways of conducting our public meetings. So I'll ask staff if they can address how public comment will work during this meeting.
Thank you, Chair Mercado. Good evening, commissioners. Tonight we are accepting public comments over the telephone and through the YouTube live chat channel. In addition, we are now offering closed captioning streaming of this meeting. The link to the closed captioning service can be found in the chat box, the YouTube live chat box. This meeting is being streamed live to YouTube, where members of the community can provide public comments on agenda items in YouTube's live chat at www.youtube.com/City of San Rafael, one word. We also have the option for community members to attend via conference call at the following phone number, 669-900-9128. And the meeting ID for this meeting is 872-0645-4435. All this information is also on the YouTube live channel, so you can take a look there. So if you are participating tonight by telephone and wish to provide comments, you can press *9 when the public hearing for the item you're interested in opens. And at that point, what that does is that virtually raises your hand. Once it is your turn to speak, you will hear a notification that the host is inviting you to participate. At that time, you can press *6 to unmute yourself. You can then speak, introduce yourself, and you'll be allotted up to 3 minutes to provide your public comments. One important note, if you're watching this on YouTube live and you're calling in to make your comments, you will have to turn the audio down on the YouTube live stream. Otherwise, you'll get into a feedback loop and you won't know if you're speaking or not. And it'll cause some delay. If you are submitting public comments on YouTube chat feature, you can enter those comments in the live chat box, and you can let us know that you want your comments to be read out loud by writing in all caps, public comment. Prior to your comments, introduce yourself. Just let us know if you're speaking on an agenda item or non-agenda item. Comments in the chat are also limited to about 3 minutes worth of text. The YouTube live chat box does have a 200-character limit. So if your comment will have more than 200 characters, you can enter your first comment and then hit enter and then be able to add another 200 characters in the next box and so forth. Comments will be read as submitted. Words including profanity, obscenity, or discriminatory language that disturb the decorum of the meeting will not be read into the record. If you submitted comments prior to the meeting by email or letter, it has been forwarded to the Planning Commission and published to the website. For more information regarding the real-time public comments, please visit our live public commenting pilot page at www.cityofsanrafael.org/live-commenting-pilot.
Thank you, Rafi. Okie dokie, let me do a quick meeting procedure overview. So tonight we're going to start with the staff report. And we don't have an applicant tonight, so we'll have that go forward. Then we'll bring it back to the commission. If there's any questions of staff on that item, then we're going to open it to the public, where we'll invite public members to speak. And we'll read any comments that were made on the YouTube live chat. And people on the conference call can speak when they receive the notification that they have been unmuted. And a reminder to keep your minutes between 2 to 3 minutes. Commission will then have the opportunity to ask questions of staff after that, the applicant or the public, and then we'll close the public hearing and bring it back and then provide direction. So next is urgent communications. Anyone with any urgent communications not a topic on the agenda may address the commission at this time.
Okay, so if there's anyone on the conference call or through Zoom that wishes to provide public comment on a topic not on this agenda, please press *9 now on your phone or raise your hand to let us know that you want to provide comments. Once it is your turn, you'll hear a notification that the host is inviting you to participate. At that time, press *6 to unmute yourself, and then you can provide your comments. While I wait for participants to press *9 for items not on the agenda, I'll check YouTube Live to see if there's any comments for items not on the agenda. And it does not look like there are any comments for items not on the agenda, nor do I see any hands raised on the phone lines.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to the consent calendar, which looks like we have minutes for our last meeting, October 27th. And see if there's any comments from anyone on the consent calendar. Rafi, I'll look back at you to see if anybody's checked in on that item of the consent calendar.
Anybody has any comments on the consent calendar? Now is the time to type them into the chat box or to raise your hand while from your phone by pressing *9. Let's give that 20 seconds to see if anybody submits any comments on the consent calendar, which is the minutes of October 27th. Okay, not seeing any comments in the chat box on the consent calendar, nor any hands raised on the consent calendar.
Great. Okay. Does anyone have any comments or edits to the consent calendar, to the minutes? If not, you can make a motion now.
Move to approve.
Great. Do we have a second?
Second.
Great. Motion and a second. So we can take a quick roll call, please.
Commissioner Hill,
Yes.
Commissioner Lubomirsky,
I'll abstain.
Commissioner Previtali,
Yes.
Commissioner Saudi,
Yes.
Vice Chair Samudzi,
Yes.
and Chair Mercado.
Yes. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the public hearings now. And we have our one matter tonight, which is the public hearing on chapters 10 through 14 of the draft San Rafael General Plan. And I'll ask if staff can please provide us their report.
Thank you, commissioners. I'm Barry Miller, the consulting project manager for General Plan 2040. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start with a short PowerPoint presentation that highlights what we'll be covering tonight. Can everybody see that okay? Okay, great. So just a reminder as to where we are on the timeline. You can see the red star in the sort of early mid-November, which is where we are this evening. General Plan 2040 was actually released in two batches, first at the beginning of October and then the second batch at the end of October. We did have the first hearing on chapters 1 through 9 on October 27th. And covered about 2/3 of the document at that point. And now we're going through the remaining 1/3, chapters 10 through 14. We're expecting the EIR to be released at either the end of November, beginning of December, roughly that time period. And the Downtown Precise Plan also will be released at that time. We anticipate coming back to you on December 15th for a follow-up to the October 27th and November 12th hearings with some suggestions as to how we will edit the plan to respond to the comments that were received. And then the January hearing will focus on the EIR. We anticipate the comment period for the EIR will end either the end of January or the beginning of February. It will be 60 days after the release of the EIR regardless. So there'll be a 60-day public comment period on the EIR from the date that it's released. At this point, we still anticipate coming back to the Planning Commission later in March, the end of March, for a public hearing with a recommendation to forward the General Plan 2040 and the Downtown Precise Plan and the final EIR to the City Council, who would then hold public hearings on the documents in April and May of 2021. So we are at this point a couple of weeks off the schedule we originally published, but still working to get this adopted by spring of 2021. Here again is just a reminder of the contents of General Plan 2040. You can see on the left the chapters that we covered at the previous meeting. There were 9 of them, roughly organized into these kind of high-level categories of first a couple of chapters that set the context for the plan, 3 chapters on the built environment, 4 chapters on the natural environment, and now this evening, the areas that are highlighted in the yellow square, the 3 elements that deal with connecting the city, that's mobility, which might be better known as transportation. Chapter 11 is community services and infrastructure. Chapter 12, arts and culture. And then we get into the next section of the plan, which is opportunity for all. And that includes economic vitality, the new equity, diversity, and inclusion element, and the housing element. And I mentioned this at the last meeting. I will mention it again. We're not updating the housing element as part of General Plan 2040. That element is updated based on a schedule set by the state of California and will take place in 2021 and 2022. All cities in the Bay Area have a housing element due to be adopted by January 31st, 2023. So that is something that you'll be hearing a lot more about a year from now, but not yet at this point. So I'm going to just quickly walk through the 5 elements that we'll be discussing this evening. I should also add that for the public's sake, that we are also accepting comments on chapters 1 through 9, as well as chapters 10 through 14. So if you didn't get a chance to speak on those first 9 chapters at the last meeting, or you wanted to go back to a comment or make a comment on those topic areas, we are allowing that at this meeting as well. We are, though, focusing our discussion on mobility and the other chapters that I mentioned just a moment ago. So there are 7 goals in the mobility element. You can see them here on the screen. Most of these are either carried over from General Plan 2020, or they've been nuanced in some way from what was in General Plan 2020. We're calling this the mobility element rather than the circulation element, because it really looks more broadly at how people move around the city, how neighborhoods are connected to each other, and really kind of takes a bigger perspective than just looking at our roads and kind of how our roads perform. So the first goal deals with regional leadership, and this recognizes that San Rafael is the county seat and the largest city in Marin County, and should be a regional leader on topics related to transportation and mobility. The second goal looks at transportation efficiency and access, and this is where we have our level of service policies that deal with really the performance of our road system and our road networks, dealing with issues around congestion and so on. Goal 3 looks at cleaner transportation. This is a new goal that's been added to the general plan, and it is where we have our policies and standards for vehicle miles traveled. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. The intent of this goal is really to align the mobility element with the climate change action plan. So a lot of the policy content under goal 3 is really from the city's climate action plan. It's the policies that look to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that come from transportation, which is the single largest source by far of greenhouse gas emissions in San Rafael. Goal 4 looks at public transit. This is also a new goal that's been added to the mobility element. Many of the policies are carried over, but the goal about having high quality, affordable transit is new. And this recognizes that the city doesn't provide transit itself. And many of the policies are about the steps the city can take to assist the transit service providers, Golden Gate Transit, Marin Transit, and so on, SMART, et cetera, in providing transit that's really effective and that serves multiple purposes. Goal 5 looks at the impact of transportation facilities on our community, both the ways they can positively shape the community by connecting neighborhoods and also potential negative aspects of transportation. So we look at things like traffic calming and the appearance of our streets and trying to make them a positive presence in the community and so on. Goal 6 deals with safe walking and cycling. This is really an opportunity to weave the city's bicycle and pedestrian master plan into the general plan. Goal 7 is a carryover from the prior general plan, and those are parking policies, and they look forward to the next 20 years and address kind of our vision for parking in 2040. So I'm just going to add a couple of slides here that I wanted to bring up on the level of service and vehicle miles traveled. So these are two different metrics that are used to measure transportation. And for the past 40 years, the city has relied on level of service, which you guys know as LOS, which works sort of like a report card. A street segment or a road intersection is given a letter grade from A through F that tells you how well that intersection or segment is performing. And it's really about what's the delay to get through an intersection or to travel from point A to point B along a segment. So that was the metric that was used in all EIRs in our general plan from really the mid 1980s until 2020. The reason we have an LOS standard is really to address congestion. It's very localized and it looks at, as I said, at travel delay. What the state of California did in 2013 is they adopted Senate Bill 743, which essentially said, hey, if you keep relying only on LOS to evaluate development, then you're going to, the answer to maintain a good LOS is to widen the road or build more turning lanes or basically make it easier to drive. And the problem with making it easier to drive is that that's running counter to our goals of reducing greenhouse gases and dealing with the climate crisis. And so effective July 1st, 2020, it took 7 years to implement SB 743, but it is now in effect. And what it says is we can no longer use LOS in our environmental review documents because of that sort of conflict between widening roads to make it easier to travel and to be able to go faster, and also trying to reduce driving and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that come with driving. So this is just a quick comparison on the screen of what we're looking at, what LOS measures and what VMT measures. The way we've dealt with this in General Plan 2040 is to actually maintain both standards. So LOS is a planning standard and a standard that's used to evaluate development. But for CEQA purposes, we look at VMT. And for VMT, what we're looking at is how many miles per capita is a new development going to generate. And there are various various measures that are used to estimate the miles per capita for, say, a 10-unit subdivision or a 50,000 square foot retail building. So we have that data to be able to calculate what is significant if a new project goes in. So this is a topic area where we have had extensive input from the City Council. In fact, we had 3 multi-hour work, well, I won't say study sessions, but meetings with the city council. This was agendized on their meetings both in 2019 and earlier in 2020 to get their direction, because this is a fairly critical matter for how we treat new development and how we conduct development review. The direction that the council provided was to retain level of service for use in planning and development review, to continue to collect traffic improvement fees that are based on trip generation. In other words, a fee is collected based on the number of trips that a project is expected to generate to address the impact of that development on the transportation system. They asked that we set up a system that minimizes the need for frequent council CEQA overrides and having to take every project to the council for an exception. So in other words, those standards had to be tailored to reflect conditions that were appropriate in San Rafael, to avoid creating additional obstacles for housing. And I think what we mean by this is we don't want to create more hurdles, additional studies, additional detailed analyses for every single project that comes in. And then to utilize the Office of Planning and Research metric of aiming for reducing our vehicle miles traveled to 15% below the regional average for VMT by 2040. So that's sort of an ongoing target. And then lastly, to provide an LOS exemption for downtown San Rafael, where many of the roads are actually already at LOS E and F, but to continue to require traffic studies and address the impacts of projects on traffic conditions in downtown. Now, I do want to add that we have Rafat Ray, our city traffic engineer, and Bob Grandy, our transportation planning consultant, on this call so that they're available to respond to questions or comments that may come up on LOS and VMT. You also have Paul and Rafi and myself to respond to comments. It's a fairly wonky technical subject, and we recognize that some of this may require some follow-up explanation. So moving on to the community services and infrastructure element, what this element does is it combines topics that are currently addressed in 5 different places in the general plan and really looks at all of the different services that are provided in the city, both by the city of San Rafael and by other special districts in the city and planning area. So this covers schools, which were formerly in the governance element of the general plan. It covers libraries, which were in the culture and arts element of the general plan. It covers solid waste, which were formerly in the sustainability element. And then we have water, sewer, and drainage services as well. So you've got these different topic areas that are now all addressed in one chapter of the general plan. So let me move on. So the arts and culture element, this is an existing element in San Rafael General Plan 2020. We're carrying it forward with some changes. I just mentioned that we moved libraries out. That's now in the community services element. Historic preservation, which was part of arts and culture, has been moved to community design and preservation. What this allows us to do is really focus the arts and culture element on the arts community and the contribution of the arts to life in San Rafael and to the economy of San Rafael. And I will say we had some really good input on this element from the arts community. We had a focus group and a number of meetings with local artists and arts organizations in the city. And you can see just a sampling of some of the policies in this element here, those bulleted items, really elevating San Rafael's role as a cultural hub in the North Bay, acknowledging and appreciating the arts as a major element of the city's economy, making sure our arts programming is inclusive and diverse and reflects the culture of the city, a lot of opportunities for partnerships with our arts community, space for the arts, and so on. I think really that bottom bullet, which is to create an arts supportive environment, is critical to this, particularly post-pandemic and during the pandemic, really looking at the impacts on the arts community and the way that might shape the future. And kind of segueing on the same topic, I'll say this, the economic vitality element, really we had to do a substantial rewrite on this element because of the pandemic, and a lot of the policies and the analysis in this chapter was done in 2018 and 2019. So I think, you know, we've had to make some strategic adjustments, for example, about the future of our office sector, for example, in light of the fact that 40% of our workforce is now telecommuting. We don't really know what's going to happen to the office economy post-COVID. So there's this element of uncertainty in this chapter. But also, I think, you know, it is a 20-year plan, and we are looking long-term, and there are these kind of broader goals that still shape our policy responses to some of these issues. So, for example, the first goal in this element is a healthy and resilient economy. That is more true now than ever before. So that's an example of where, well, the goal is still valid, but getting there is going to require a slightly different path. One of the implementation actions in this chapter is to do an economic development strategic plan, again, kind of leading the way out of the pandemic and toward recovery. There are a whole series of policies in this element about the importance of workforce housing, the importance of workforce development, business attraction, business retention strategies. And then under the second goal, we kind of take a different lens and look at our retail sector, our office sector, our industrial, hotel, government, healthcare, and so on. And that bullet about retaining industrial land is key, because I think I mentioned at the last meeting when we talked about land use that was also a big issue, is what, you know, how important is it to retain our industrial land supply versus allowing other uses on those properties. And finally, the equity, diversity, and inclusion element. And I want to add here that this is a new requirement, a state law that went into effect just last year, that cities that have disadvantaged communities are required under SB 1000 to develop. It's actually technically called an environmental justice element. But when you look at the topic areas that are covered under environmental justice, it's really broader than that. And in working with our steering committee and our partner organizations like Canal Alliance, we really wanted to frame this around broader issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as strictly environmental justice. There was a Spanish language outreach program that was done as part of the general plan update, and the outcome of that is really woven into these policies. You can see the goals here on the screen. Again, I think I mentioned this to some extent at the last meeting, that these are you know, really important priorities and issues, not just in the Canal neighborhood, which is the designated disadvantaged community, but also throughout San Rafael, where we have a number of issues related to equity, including the issue of being an age-friendly community, which is also covered in this. And there's a map in the general plan, which some of you may have seen, that shows the percentage of residents over 75 in different census tracts around the city. And it's over 15% in 3 of the census tracts. This is over 75, not 65. So it's the city does have an aging population, and there are some proactive policies. So just again, to wrap up for tonight's hearing, we are providing an opportunity after the presentation for some clarifying questions, and then taking public comment. I mentioned that we'll take comment on all 14 chapters, although our focus is really on those last 5. We're asking the commission to discuss any public comments that have come in, either by letter or in the oral testimony following this presentation, and then focus on chapters 10 through 14. At the end of the discussion, we'll continue the hearing to December 15th. And at that time, we'll go over some staff responses to the issues that were raised. We will hopefully have an opportunity at that meeting to walk you through the downtown precise plan. Some of this is still a little bit tentative, and we'll be fine-tuning the dates in the next couple of days. I again want to reiterate that this process is going to go on for several months, that there'll be additional opportunities for public comment through early 2021. at the Planning Commission and then at the City Council in the spring. Just to recap the letters that were in your packet, we did receive 3 pieces of correspondence on on tonight's agenda. First is a letter from Marin Autobahn on canalways, which I believe may have been submitted prior to the last meeting as well. That was resubmitted. And then a comment from Responsible Growth Marin, a comment letter primarily on the mobility element, and then a comment letter from Hillside Neighbors in the West End area, again relating to various parts of chapters 10 through 14. All of these documents are online at sanrafael2040.org, and we would encourage members of the public to visit the website, download the general plan, and provide comments to us via email in the future. And that concludes my presentation. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Barry. That was great. Appreciate it. All right, I'll put this back to the commission and see, prior to opening up for public comment, if there's any questions anybody has for Barry. Now's your shot.
Yeah, I do have one question. So last session, we talked a little bit about the discussion around some of those objective standards, what that might look like, and how we might tie them together as sort of a larger strategic picture. And I know that we had wanted to defer some of this conversation until these sections, particularly around sort of the economic vitality piece. And I see that, we've touched upon it a little bit. We don't really have, I guess, what I was expecting or what I was sort of thinking of in terms of some of those more well-defined metrics for us to hit and build strategy around from a policy perspective. What kind of format would you be looking for if we had some explicit recommendations around that?
There are 2 options, really. One is to bring it up this evening and make some suggestions. But I would say the other possibility is if you want to submit something in writing, some ideas or some specific requests or thought, we can look at that and respond by the December 15th meeting and maybe include some thoughts or some ideas more specifically about that at that time. I think that you'll see in the implementation section that there will be a little bit more specificity about metrics, but in general, because of the nature of the plan, it's really not a strategic plan where you would have these benchmarks and standards. You have them in some places. For example, the transportation section sets particular metrics for 2040, but overall, we're not, each chapter does not have a set of metrics and standards embedded in it.
Mm-hmm. Understood. And I totally understand in terms of this is a very specific scope. What I just want to make sure is that said strategy is encompassed somewhere. And I know that, if we have a lot of different documents that are supposed to be derivative, I don't know if there is a place where it is going to be captured that this is what the community goal is for this 20-year period. Here's how we can measure where we've met that. So if you're saying that there's some other place where that is going to be contained,
right?
Maybe could you share what some of those might be?
Sure. Yeah, and that's a good segue. The housing element actually is all about metrics and all about quantified standards, but those are assigned to the city by the state. So the state basically says you have to meet these targets, or you have to aim for these targets and plan for these targets. And so those are embedded in that particular chapter. The Climate Change Action Plan, which is a strategic plan that flows from the general plan. Everything in that plan is quantifiable and measurable because it's all linked to how many tons of GHG will be reduced from the atmosphere as a result of implementing this particular strategy. The bike and ped plan, I would say it's quantifiable because there are specific projects in the document that can be implemented and programmed, as capital improvements over time. there are fire prevention plans that are more action oriented, where there are specific programs. Those are all kind of, I would say, they flow from the general plan, but they're not in the, this is intended to be kind of the high level framework for policies, and those more measurable, quantifiable, specific plans are going to come out of, the actions that are in this plan, if that helps at all.
Yeah, no, I get that. So two more things, sorry, and then I'll yield the floor. I guess the piece, where I'm getting kind of stuck up on is, while I do recognize that there are going to be some other, derivative offshoots, it's still, for me, even if this is supposed to be sort of a generalized plan, I think especially for areas specifically around like economic vitality or things around like, population growth and sort of understanding and managing sort of inclusion and what that looks like, I still do think that it's essential for us to have codified in this plan, given that we're going to be updating it every 20 years anyway, for us to have like very specific things that we're saying, like as a city, we want to grow towards in this 20 years, that is defined, stake in the ground. For example, like we want to make sure that, there's a certain type of job growth in this particular area, because if we're recognizing that these are going to be sort of incipient problems that are going to snowball, if we don't, that it makes it clear that, we're not really giving legislative leeway for us to, kind of pick and choose what parts of that problem to solve. I think another one would be, for example, what we do to mitigate the impact of wildfires. I know that you mentioned that cars are the number one cause of emissions, but it's actually wildfires by not even a close amount. That's the cause of greenhouse gas emissions by not just San Rafael, but across the state. And that's caused in part by some issues like, PG&E infrastructure, blowing up and causing fires. So I feel as if there are very definite things that we ought to say that, like, if we don't solve this as a community, like it is potentially existential crisis for us as a city or for a region. And so that's why I keep pushing back and saying, like, I think that there should be some elements that we should not be afraid to put in this 2020 plan to say, we are kind of screwed if we don't address this problem. It is a ticking time bomb, either demographically or environmentally.
Thank you.
If I may, and I think just to build on Commissioner Samuthi's comments, and I think you started to allude to this, Barry, which is, with the climate change action plan, and I think a lot of what you were starting to talk about, Commissioner Samuthi, was in the wildfire prevention and protection action plan. It seems like, if I can say it this way, Barry, this document is very centered around, policies and goals. I think that there are other offshoots. Maybe it's worth, in the introduction, actually including the mapping of where all those are, because I think it'll be very clear to people who are trying to get oriented where some of these, I think, more measurable, quantifiable areas live. Because I would note the same thing, that the climate change action plan is referenced in this document. And then I looked at the climate change action plan. It's very specific, and it's very specific around thresholds that were intended to achieve it on certain dates. So I thought it was incredibly useful, but it's not mentioned very much. And I think that's by design, but it would be good as a consideration to maybe create that mapping in this document.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, it's something I can look at putting together. Thanks.
One other comment along the same lines. I also thought it would be good to, identify the top goals for each section, associate them with metrics that can be measured over time, and then ideally put together a consolidated progress report that would be periodically updated with the achievement of those goals and publish that online. Maybe every year, maybe every 2 years, something like that, so people can track the progress of the top goals for each section.
Yeah, there is a progress reporting system already in place, and then every 5 years there's a kind of a major evaluation of the plan. So that's we already have that set up, and that's something that will continue.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think also, I mean, I appreciate the comments of both commissioners that it's nice to have a specificity and measurable goals, and it feels like you're being more productive, and you are more productive probably. But having sat on this 20 years ago, it seems like about a year ago, but being a chair for the 2020, this is the 30,000 foot, and you have to give the council some flexibility in terms of what their ideas and goals are, because that's who it ultimately comes down to, the funding of these specific goals. So it's tough with 20 or 30 people in a room to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a numbered sequential goal. Just, I mean, having gone through that, it's a challenge. But I mean, the where the rubber meets the road is where the council decides on what those things will be funded. So I mean, this is the overarching kind of view, and I think it's a great document. I think Barry, you guys and your staff and city staff, having sat through the last one, it seems much more modern. It seems much more inclusive. It reaches to the segments of our citizens and population that were totally neglected before. So I think it's a much stronger document, and I was impressed by all of it. So thank you, staff, and Barry, your team too. You just did a great job, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, and I also want to add that there's an appendix to it's actually the first appendix in the plan, which is an implementation program, basically, that kind of does a little bit of what we're talking about here by laying out the priority for each action, the funding source for actions, the responsible agencies for actions. So, or I should say programs. So there is that link to implementation that's there, in some sense of what's the top priority and what's the impact of implementing this action relative to the others. So I do think when that appendix is completed, that some of this will be addressed at that point. We'll have that before the December meeting.
I'll just mention one more thing. I think, you know, what I was envisioning with regard to a periodic consolidated progress report, which sounds like it's, you know, it will be done, is not, I wasn't envisioning something that couldn't evolve, right? With the changes that are needed, obviously. So, yeah, I mean, I think it would definitely be okay to, you know, set the top goals now, but then set and readjust those goals in 5 years as needed. You know, based on all those variables that were just mentioned, budget, the acceleration of climate change, other variables. So I think just, you know, having a sort of like a philosophy consistent with Commissioner Samutzi's idea of creating goals and then measuring them and you know, reporting on progress against those goals it's important to essentially imbue into the entire 2040 plan. And I think it is, but it might be useful to potentially have a box somewhere in the plan calling that out if it's not already there.
Any other comments before we open it back to the public? No? All right. Thank you, everybody. So now we will open this up for public comment, please.
Thank you, Chair Mercado. So it looks like we have some people on the phone line, and we also have some comments in chat. So as a reminder, if there's anyone on the conference call that wishes to provide public comments on this agenda item, press *9 to virtually raise your hand. Once it is your turn, you'll hear a notification that the host is inviting you to participate. At that time, press *6 to unmute yourself. You can then speak, introduce yourself, and be allotted up to 3 minutes to speak. Please make sure you don't have the volume on any other device watching YouTube live. Make sure that it's turned down so you don't get feedback. While I wait for participants on the phone to press *9, I'll also request public comments to be submitted through YouTube live chat. And looks like I have some already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a couple of the chat comments and then move over to the phone comments. So first comment on chat is from Shirley Fisher from Responsible Growth Marin, has submitted a letter with more detailed comments on the mobility element, and Responsible Growth Marin endorses and on our concerns about unpredictable traffic patterns, VMT LOS issues, enforceability and specificity, documentation, parking, and other clarifications. We ask that attention be given to concerns in this letter. Second comment is from Pam Reeves of Responsible Growth Marin, RGM. Appreciates the city's commitment to that traffic studies and mitigation measures will be required for development projects that impact intersections and roads which are already worse than the city standards. Deeply appreciate the equity, diversity, and inclusion element. It would be great to have each public meeting begin with acknowledging the indigenous land we occupy. CSI 4.7A pavement management need to mandate the use of cool pavement. It can decrease the 12 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit than traditional asphalt, as proven in other California cities. I strongly support the letter from Marin Conservation League. And I'll read one more before we switch over to the phone. David Smith appreciates the Planning Commission's work. In the last meeting, comments were made about some of the earlier elements, 1 through 10. I asked the Planning Commission to also review those comments overall. Thanks. So now we'll move on to the phone line. Once again, once you hear that you've been asked to speak, go ahead and unmute yourself by pressing *6 and make sure that your YouTube live volume is down. So we'll go with the first caller.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Rich Storek, and I'm honored to represent the Canal Arts Initiative, which is a group of organizations, arts, business, educational, and community in San Rafael. There are 11 so far, promoting public art, especially in East San Rafael and the Canal. Canal Alliance, Dominican University, Chamber of Commerce, Marin Society of Artists, and Artworks Downtown, and 6 other arts and community organizations are part of our initiative. Our members have worked to ensure that the 2040 plan draft does anticipate the formation of an official, long-needed city arts body. We've called it Arts San Rafael, to manage a vibrant citywide arts program. The current approval process for a public art mural, one in fact we have got funded and ready to go at 3301 Kerner, we are told could take 3 to 4 months and about an $8,000 application fee, either of which would be impossible and kill the project. So we're hoping to work for a creative solution and get your support. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll move on to the next caller. I'm going to allow them to talk.
You want me to speak?
Yeah, go ahead. It's your time to.
All right, this is Barbara Salzman. You didn't hear you say my name. This is Barbara Salzman from Marin Audubon Society. I'll try and do better this time. I don't have any other devices on. And I'm commenting with a summary of the letter that we submitted for your last meeting. And I'd like to begin with thanking staff and for the support for our Tiscornia Marsh project that we're very pleased to be doing in the canal area of San Rafael. And then to move on to some other sites there, canalways, I'd really like to urge you to remove from policy NH-24 the statement that development should be economically viable for the site's owners. Now, I've been looking at EIRs for a long time. I have never seen anything like that in an EIR, in a plan. And it is the purpose of a plan, as you all know, is to provide the vision for the community from the community members. It's not to support any kind of economic benefit or viability for a property owner, no matter who the property owner is. So that's something that we would really urge you to remove. We've been concerned about the canalways property actually for many more years than I've been involved. We tried to buy it twice and we're not successful. So it is a site that's important for habitat, it's important for sea level rise, adaptation, and it is not a site that should be developed except for the upland and higher elevation areas along the street. So then moving on to a few other items, I'll just summarize my letter. There's a lot of wetland policies, the basic intent of which is very positive, to protect the wetlands. But there's a lot of allowances for exceptions for people that for really unidentified reasons. And it seems to be at the whim of whomever. I don't know whether it would be the Planning Commission, the council, consultants that are hired, or developers. We think it would be much more to the benefit of the wetlands and the city if there were some specific criteria included in these policies for circumstances under which you would consider exceptions to the policies. There's 2 or 3 of them. And then finally, the last point I'll address today is the trees. Now, last time you had a bunch of comments from people in San Rafael wanting to protect redwood trees, which is great. We support that. But there are a lot of other native trees that are also important. And there really is only one mention that we could find of native trees being protected in all of the policies and programs. So we suggested some policies where the native species should be added, and we would hope that would be looked at and provide better protection for native trees. I mean, the way it reads, you could be having people protect eucalyptus and acacia trees. They're highly flammable, non-native trees. I know some people think they're attractive, but they have minimal ecological value in our communities. If you live in Australia, you might be okay. But anyway, thank you for paying attention to our comments, and we look forward to having them be addressed. Thanks.
Okay, we'll move on to the next caller.
Hi, this is Phil Hallstein. I wanted just to thank the people who worked on this plan. So many elements, so much detail, really great thinking, very coherent plan. I just want to express my appreciation. I made some comments on chat, but just wanted you to hear my voice and just express how hard I knew you had to work to get this done. This is a terrific document. Thank you.
So we have a few more chat comments that I'll get to right now. If there's anybody else on the phone line who hasn't spoken that wishes to speak, now is the time to press *9 to raise your hand if you haven't spoken already. And I'll go while people are deciding whether to speak, I'll go back to the chat comments and read those. So Scott Frerich from RGM, Responsible Growth Marin. Standards need to be created to preserve on-street parking in residential neighborhoods near existing or proposed high-density areas. Policies M7.6 and M7.7 emphasize decreasing off-street parking requirements to encourage housing in high-density projects. This is unfair to adjacent residential areas who will suffer from saturated on-street parking. A better balance is needed between encouraging new housing and preserving quality of life in existing neighborhoods. It's easier to release a restriction than trying to tighten one. Now is the time to act before it's too late. And then Phil Halstein, also from RGM, Responsible Growth Marin. Pleased to hear the plan has some quantifiable measures. I would like to see even more specific measurable standards in the mobility program elements. Also, the plan coherence will improve if the language could be more actionable and concrete, such as replacing may or shall with will or shall, and using timeframes when possible, particularly in policies M2.5 to M2.10. Thanks. Overall, good job. And it looks like we've got 3 more people who haven't commented on the phone line. So I'm going to turn on the first one.
Good evening. This is Bill Carney with Sustainable San Rafael. And I thought I would chime in because of all the climate change connections that are in the chapters before you tonight. And I found very useful on page 638, 6-38 of the plan, the crosswalk on climate change impacts that really links to all the other elements. So mobility is a prime one. And I just wanted to mention a couple of things to reinforce a couple of things in the draft general plan that hopefully will stay in the forefront of your minds as you discuss it. One is, vehicle miles traveled is a new metric, obviously, but it's one of great importance for addressing greenhouse gas emissions. That's why the state has asked that it get some priority. And I think we as a community really need to work to make that work as a metric for accomplishing that end of fewer greenhouse gases. Secondly, I know there's a lot of discussion around transit-oriented development, and I just want to remind all of us that it doesn't just mean more development; it also means more transit. So if if we as a community can continue to build our transit resources, then we can continue to develop without reduced negative impacts. Downtown is great for that, of course, already. But I would submit that Northgate Center also could work as a walkable, mixed-use, compact neighborhood like downtown, as long as the transit up there keeps pace with development, and as long as that development is carefully planned. And then thirdly, traffic demand management strategies are really critical to making this work. When there's new development, really looking for things that can reduce the trips generated, for commercial development, providing free or discounted transit passes for employees would be a dramatic and effective example of that. There's mention of cost-benefit analysis in here, several places. I just want to emphasize that that's fine, but it's not the end of the game. That ultimately these decisions are qualitative judgments, and that should be kept foremost in everybody's mind. Okay, a couple of other elements that are very important for these climate issues are housing. Certainly the housing element, not under discussion, but will be in the next couple of years. And it's really inseparable from solving for mobility. We've got to solve for housing. Again, the key being in compact, walkable neighborhoods well served by transit. And also assuring that all those new homes are energy efficient, are ready for climate change, and are all electric. And then in the infrastructure element that's before you tonight, wanted to stress the importance of getting these organics out of the landfills and back into the ground as compost, addressing the very powerful greenhouse gas of methane. And then finally, equity is an important crosswalk from climate change. Those hit the first and the worst by climate change are living in these disadvantaged communities, and that needs to be recognized in everything that we do as a city. So thank you very much for your careful consideration of the general plan.
Okay, we'll move on to the next caller.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Sutton. I am the executive director at Artworks Downtown here in San Rafael on 4th Street. I am calling to say thank you so much to the group who put together the 2040 plan. I know that it took a tremendous amount of work, and I just wanted to express my thanks, especially to Barry Miller, who captured so well some of the visions for the arts community in the downtown. I am very much in support of the arts and culture in downtown San Rafael. I believe from my experience at working at Artworks Downtown in the executive director position that the arts are considerable and necessary to the contributions to the well-being of our community in San Rafael. Arts and culture is a powerful tool from which we can engage our community, and it's important for personal, social, and political expression. And I sincerely hope that we will see more of the arts in the downtown, especially public art. I'd like to ask for consideration of a vehicle of some sort through the city of San Rafael to carry out some of the ideas written in the plan. I felt like there was something very much missing, a lot of really great ideas, but no pragmatic approach to how we can accomplish those goals. So again, thank you to everybody for putting this wonderful plan together. I feel like it's a real strong marching forward for the city and our progression and development for a better community. Thank you so much.
And looks like we have one more person that's raised their hand.
Hi, this is Kate Powers. I wanted to also say I'm just really impressed with how the final document has turned out, and I really appreciate Barry's work as well as Paul Jensen's and Rafi's work. There were a couple of items that I just wanted to comment on. I was wondering if Barry would comment on the statement that Barbara Salzman from Marin Audubon was commenting on in terms of the neighborhood element that says development should be economically viable for the site's owners, beneficial for the surrounding community, and responsive to the site's environmental resources and hazards. I'm just wondering if that is a statement that is consistent throughout the document, and how that those different elements in terms of economically viable, beneficial for the surrounding community, and responsive to the site's environmental resources is evaluated and worked out. The other thing that I just wanted to express, and I think I did at the last Planning Commission meeting, is that the forecast that San Rafael had was for increased jobs as well as increased population. And the Plan Bay Area forecast show decreasing in jobs in San Rafael while increasing population. And my concern is that I think we need to focus housing and office development around transit stations that have high frequency and high capacity transit that go to areas that have jobs of some density. I have some concern about priority development areas. The one in North San Rafael, as well as in the Canal area, and future development there without enough transit to get people to work. And so I just would like to bring the Planning Commission's attention to Land Use Policy LU 1.3 about that. I think we need transit that moves high numbers of people to common destinations in order to achieve our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals and reducing congestion and all of the other goals. And those are really my main two comments. I wanted to really commend, I think mobility is a regional issue, has a lot of regional aspects to it that the city doesn't have control over, but I really appreciate the mobility element. And I also really appreciate the infrastructure element and the section on public involvement in infrastructure, because I think there's a lot of opportunity to plan infrastructure with environmental goals in mind. And this would give an opportunity to for the public to comment on those goals during major infrastructure projects. Thank you.
Okay, are there any further callers who have not spoken yet? If there are and you want to speak, press *9 to raise your hand. And there is a couple chat comments that were part of other comments that I missed reading. So to expand on Shirley Fisher's comment, there is a lot of uncertainty about work and traffic patterns post-COVID. ME assumes that mobility element assumes that commuting and vehicle trips will return to pre-COVID trends, which may be erroneous. Mobility element page 10.4, 5, and 6 should be rewritten to reflect how telecommuting, out-migration from Bay Area, and census underrepresentation of undocumented residents may affect traffic patterns. Pam Reeves had said she strongly agrees with Barbara Salzman. Please make sure the most current SLR data is used whenever decisions are made. And then David Smith wanted to echo Shirley Fisher's comments about less commute traffic may result in more local traffic, thus local pollution. This needs to be taken into consideration. VMT alone will not do this. So those are all the chat comments. If there's any new chat comments from people who haven't commented, now is the time to submit them. And it looks like there is one new caller who I will allow to talk here. So caller with last four digits of 3228, you've been allowed to talk, so go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like to make your comments by pressing *6. Okay, 3228, now is the time. Okay, then we have one caller that looks like has already spoken, Chair Mercado. I'm not sure if you want to have them open them up again. Or...
Looks like we have somebody. 3228.
Yeah. Make sure your audio is down on YouTube so you're not hearing a feedback loop.
Hello, this is Grace Garrity.
Go ahead and make your
comment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Grace Garrity.
Yes, go ahead and make your comments, and you can turn down your YouTube live so you don't hear the feedback loop. Make sure your audio is down on YouTube so you're not hearing the feedback loop.
Hello, this is Grace Garrity. Can you hear me? This is Grace Garrity.
Oh, Grace, you just went mute. Rafi, let's see if Grace can get back on. I think if anybody's already spoken tonight, you can submit your comments through any of the other options. And as Barry indicated earlier, there'll be other opportunities to come back on continued discussions. Rafi, let me know when you're ready. If we're able to get Grace in there.
Looks like we've lost 3228.
Okay.
So we have no new phone comments and not seeing any more chat comments at this time, Chair Mikado.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to close the public hearing component now and bring this back to the commission. And I know last time what we did is we went through each chapter, and I thought that was interesting and helpful. I think we can kind of take that same approach. I'll remind the commission a lot of this really is to work with Barry in providing staff, maybe some guidance generally, and through the public comment that was provided tonight. If any of those comments that were provided triggered anything, I think it'd be good to have a conversation on that. I know it jumped out at me, there were a few specific sections. So I think between us and if staff want to look at those, we can. Again, the entirety of this is open for discussion. So what I'll do is open it up. Do we want to take it the first chapter, see if anybody has comments? And again, I would say we don't need to duplicate each other. If somebody says something you do, we can support that. But primarily, it's really put something on the table that maybe will provide Barry and staff some comments or guidance for that specific chapter. Is that fine, Barry?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. And I did want to just make one comment in response to the public comment. I think Kate Powers had asked specifically how we might respond to Barbara Salzman's comments on the canalways. Just a general comment, we are going to prepare some written edits to the document based on the letters and the feedback that we've gotten. So we do intend to revise the text based on Barbara's letter and the responsible growth in Marin letter. So you'll see at the next meeting some line edits to the document. That language about economic viability, I think we'll be removing that
Okay.
because it on further consideration of the letter, we wouldn't call that out for a single property. That's kind of more of a global statement that would apply to all properties. Kind of everyone has the right to well, without getting into details about the properties, that's something we'll address on a global level and not for an individual site. Yeah, that was the main thing. I just wanted to respond to that specific comment. And with respect to mobility, I'm ready to dive in with some some guidance on there. Paul, did you want to add anything? I saw you pop on here.
Oh, thank you, Barry. Yes, I'm glad that you mentioned that. This same issue came up with Northgate Mall. And what we've been discussing is this is anything regarding a sort of economic return on properties, et cetera, is really more appropriate to be a general type of policy that's addressed in the economic vitality element. So that's where we're focusing our attention on some changes. So I just wanted to bring that into the loop.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, thank you both. That was a hot button issue, so I appreciate that. There'll be some clarity coming out on that. Okay, so let's bring it back. Barry, what's our first chapter we're going to start with tonight?
So that would be the mobility chapter. And again, I wanted to point out that Bob Grandy and Rafat Ray are both on this call, so they can, there are resources for responding to questions that may come up. I would say really the bulk of the discussion, both at the steering committee level and with the community and with the city council, were about this shift from purely relying on level of service to having both level of service and vehicle miles traveled metrics in the plan. And as I mentioned in the earlier presentation, we started this out by saying, look, we don't have to have LOS anymore. We can't really use it for CEQA. There are cities around the state that have abandoned it entirely. And we kind of presented to the city council the range of options from no LOS to kind of status quo plus VMT, and did hear, pretty strongly, I think, from the community that LOS is desired, it's familiar, it's something that has some benefits, and we shouldn't lose it. So we have presented this kind of dual system of standards in the plan. I guess I should add that's more or less what most of the cities in the Bay Area are doing with LOS and VMT. We are in the unique position of going first. We happen to be updating our plan right after the July 1st, 2020 date on which the VMT standards went into effect. So, we've set it up so that we can adjust those standards as needed in the coming years. If they seem to be needing to be tweaked, we can do that. I would just ask the commissioners if there are any questions or thoughts or comments that you wanted to make on the LOS and VMT issue. We've gotten some pretty clear direction from council, and certainly, the responsible growth and Marin letter, I think, offers some really good suggestions that we will look at in revisions. But if there are other things that the commission wants to add or questions, we're here to respond to those.
I'll just weigh in quickly and say that I like the approach that you're using to consider both approaches, both methods. I think it's important to maintain LOS.
I agree with that, and having sat through Kerner and Anderson, and when the bridge was only 2 lanes eastbound, a lot of things we don't have control over, level I in some intersections, consider Irwin a long on-ramp. I think it was smart to consider both, because neighborhoods are concerned about the level of service.
Anyone else?
Not to put anyone on the spot, but I also wanted to see if Rafat or Bob, who are both on the call, wanted to add anything to this as well. If the commission.
Yeah, please.
Good evening. I would love to add that we have the A team to work out the complexities of this topic and what 473 brought to us. And I think we navigated. We had a lot of help from the Northgate residents, and we had an excellent process, and I think we're going to have excellent outcome. And I would like to add, now that we have the A team assembled, we are continuing to work on interpreting this policy into actual guidelines, and explain how it's going to be used. And these guidelines now, when with everyone's memories fresh about collecting all of the policies together into one a document that we can simplify the development process, as Barry mentioned. And I think keeping the VMT and the level of service is a product of the community interaction, and I'm very pleased with the process and with the outcomes that we're seeing right now.
Thank you. Commissioner Hill, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll say two things. First of all, I know Rafat and folks here have been in front of City Council at length and at great detail to talk about LLS and VMT. So I appreciate all the work that has gone in well before this meeting. I wanted Barry to jump into one. It may seem like a small thing, but there's a goal of 25% passenger vehicle being targeted as zero emission vehicles. I know that this was referenced in the climate change action plan. It wasn't clear how that number was derived in terms of how it's going to exactly kind of hit the 2030 goal and the 2050. Did you have a sense of why 25 was selected? Is that an overachievement mark, a right middle of the road mark to achieve kind of what we need to do to get to our target? I know it explains it in detail in the CCAP around the state mandates only getting us to a certain point, but that we need to do some more things locally and regionally to hit our marks. I don't know if you could kind of comment on 25% in that context.
Yeah, that, as you mentioned, that did come from the Climate Change Action Plan. And I don't know where the 25% came from, but we can certainly get the answer to that and bring it back to you by the next meeting. Corey Bidoff, who is was the manager of that process, would have that, I'm sure, at his fingertips and know where that came from.
That's good. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's just good. I think if we're having targets written right into as a policy, just want to make sure we know where they're coming from. Thank you.
I've got just 8 comments. I know that it is 8, but I'd like to, if possible, just go through them very quickly. And that's all right. Does anyone object to that? Okay. The first one is M210 sea level rise. I think it would be good to note working with Caltrans to prevent flooding of 101. The next one is M3.4, reducing commute length, reducing commute length. I think this is sort of like a crossover to another section of the 2040 plan, but I think it would be good to zone for restaurants and cafes in neighborhoods, because we're essentially becoming a community where people work from home, but they don't necessarily want to stay home all day. I know I don't. Section M3.6, low carbon transportation. This is the one I think that includes the 25% goal, which I was really happy to see. Like to see more, frankly, but 25% by 2030, I think is great. But I noticed that other cities are actually designating zero emissions zones. So it might be interesting to mention that. And also zero emissions delivery vehicles and taxis in those zones or across the entire city. This next one is M4.7B, the first mile and last mile. As a person who used to commute to San Francisco, using public transportation, this one is really important to me. So I can't tell you how many times I've either walked or taken a lift from the SMART train station or from the freeway after getting dropped off by Golden Gate Transit to my house. So I'd love to see better coordination between local transit, local public transportation, and those other transit services. I consider each freeway each freeway on-ramp actually a transit hub, and also each SMART train stop a transit hub. It would be interesting to look at it like that to ensure that each public transportation system is coordinated so people don't have to wait as much or walk as much. And I think that would also help seniors. M5.6, truck impacts. I don't know if this is mentioned somewhere else, but as people know, trucks have very high level of particulate emissions because of diesel. And so I think it would be useful to ensure that we don't have trucks, a lot of truck traffic around housing or schools. M6, I'm almost done. M6.1C. This one is the Canal Community-Based Transportation Plan. I was going to save this for the diversity and inclusion section, but I feel like the whole Canal neighborhood needs to be redeveloped and in a way that does not cause displacement of the existing population, but benefits the existing population. And I'm wondering if we can do something to develop the like water taxis, for instance, or somehow using the canals as transportation corridors for more people. And then M7, which is well-managed parking. And I again apologize if this is mentioned somewhere else, but I think it would be useful to consider electric vehicle and also e-bike charging stations when parking is being put in. So we can have a very robust electric vehicle infrastructure, and not just for people who are working there, but also for shoppers and tourists. I also think it would be interesting to mention something about ensuring there's electric vehicle charging infrastructure available for homes. See, M.714, downtown parking. I think it would be good to, mention or consider the possibility of turning 4th Street into a walking mall when you're considering downtown parking. And the last one is M7.7, parking management. Yeah, I agree with the public callers who mentioned that there could be a lot of overflow parking into neighborhoods. So that's definitely something that should be considered. And I apologize if that's mentioned already in the plan, but I think it would be good to mention it around parking management to ensure that neighborhoods are not negatively impacted by overflow parking. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else, or Barry, any responses or follow-up questions before we move on to the next chapter?
No, they were great comments. Thank you for that. Good ideas that I think we can work with. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, everybody. So chapter 11, right? Yes.
Yeah, chapter 11 is community services and infrastructure. Bob and Rafat, I think you guys can exit if you need to. I don't know. We're going to come back to mobility. So anyway, just wanted to give those guys a pass. So again, I mentioned at the beginning that this was 5 topics that were in 5 different places that we moved into a single chapter. And in terms of specific topic areas, a lot of carryover. Some topics that the steering committee spent some time on were the joint use of school facilities for community use for recreation and so on. There was some strong policy language about working with the different school districts to improve access to their facilities off hours. And look at things like traffic management, parking management around school campuses. I would say relative to the previous general plan, more on green infrastructure and really looking at how we can increase our recycled water use and improve our storm drainage to use more natural systems and so forth. Sea level rise impacts to infrastructure, I think, was a big topic area in this. There are some policies about how we're going to adapt our utilities as we deal with tidal flooding more frequently. dredging of the canal is a topic area that's in this chapter, the need for dredging and the opportunities to use dredge spoils. And then kind of an overall, there's a series of policies in the final goal in this section on budgeting and cost benefit analysis that I think resonated with a lot of steering committee members, just in terms of making sure that we do a good job at looking at both the financial costs and the environmental, social, and other costs of our investments and the benefits as well, and not just how many people are going to use an improvement versus just making the improvement. Those are some of the highlights of the steering committee conversation. I don't have anything specific that we're asking for the commission. If you had any questions or comments on that chapter, we're available now to go through that.
I have a couple comments for this section. But a lot of them are related to schools. But the partnership with the schools, there is the policy CSI 1.6 that recognizes the role of private schools as opposed to public schools. And I think, having so many private schools within Marin, and there are several in San Rafael, really thinking about expanding that partnership or emphasizing that a little more. We had just reviewed the aquatic center at Marin Academy, and there's a lot of community partnership there. And I think we can go a long way to develop similar partnerships with other private schools. And then the other comment I had was regarding, I think this probably falls within lifelong learning, CSI 1.4, city programs and classes. Parkside Child Care Center in Albert Park is a very high demand center. I'll be our 5th year at Parkside. I've had 2 of my kids go through there, and they continue to do aftercare there. And if there were 5 more Parksides, we would fill them in a minute. And, the staff there is exceptional, and the directors and the people that are leading it are exceptional. And it's a city-run program. And there's, I know many parents that say the need for that kind of care is in demand. And I think there's enough population to be able to support really seriously considering where we can find other sites that will expand those services for residents. I think this is the crisis with COVID has really highlighted the need for those kind of centers, where we have a lot of parents who need to fill in the gaps to be able to work from home without school, and they've been able to run the center safely since March. So I think that's definitely should be looked at. And as well, I had another comment about libraries and community centers. I know we have a library committee, and there are plans to build a new library. I don't know what stage the plans for the new library are in currently, but really what our libraries need are more community spaces and places for community members to be able to book and use. Those get booked very, very quickly. I myself have tried to book spaces at our library for Girl Scouts and other meetings, and we've been told that we basically can't. They're in very high demand. So as we look towards really emphasizing community and looking at ways to foster connections amongst our citizens and supporting the type of growth that's happening here, those type of programs are really vital to that. So those were really the comments that I had on this section.
Thank you. Anyone else? Sure, Commissioner Hill.
Yeah, I thought, again, Barry, this was a really well-considered section, so make that comment. I saw 2 areas, and I thought about how to make a suggestion, but essentially when I look at the safety, public safety for police and fire. There's been a fire in San Rafael, also manages emergency medical as well. I've seen, I think, two things there that we could probably resolve maybe with a policy around pilot program. I know I saw pilot program and pilot projects and other elements. So I think, this would cover kind of two ideas. One is to look at alternatives to a full ambulance role for kind of frequent or habitual users of 911 emergency, so they can have diversionary mechanisms. I think that could be covered in pilot program that will help kind of free up funding and kind of, I would say, more critical care that's needed for ambulances. And also acute mental health. I know mental health is mentioned as far as what police are responsible for, but I know that even with training, it's something that I think could be better served with dedicated mental health personnel for acute situations. I don't know if each call for a specific policy, but even just the inclusion of pilot program or pilot projects in the safety, public safety portion, I think would be helpful.
Great. I just have 3 comments. I'll do them quickly again. So CSI section 3, exceptional public safety and service. There was a public comment about this as well. I agree that we should try to ensure that all roads have access to fire and EMS vehicles. There's actually a National Fire Protection Association, NFPA, standard 1710. So, particularly some of those roads around the, I think it's called the Hillside neighborhood of the West End, as we've discussed before, don't have the ability to, some of those houses don't have the ability to be reached by fire trucks. It'd be great to upgrade those roads over the course of the next few years. Next one is CSI 4.4, sustainable design. I think it would be good to consider mentioning the use of low emission concrete for our infrastructure. There's some great new technology, as people may know, that reduces the carbon emissions associated with the creation of cement that's used for concrete. Some really good new concretes that are basically low emissions, and in some cases they sequester carbon. So that was one idea. Another comment is CSI 4.9, wastewater facilities. I think it would be interesting to consider mentioning encouraging the generation of energy, of electricity from biogas at the wastewater facilities. And then similarly with CSI 4.17, reducing landfill waste disposal. Also, considering to generate electricity from biomass that would otherwise be put into landfills. I think that would be a valuable addition. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Or Barry, any follow-up questions or thoughts?
No, I know we do mention low carbon concrete. It might be in the conservation element, but
very good. Excellent. Thank you.
No one else? We'll move on.
Great. Okay, so Paul has a question.
Oh, shoot. Go ahead, Paul.
No, I just have one comment in response to Commissioner Pervitali, is that Marin Sanitary Service is actually working on a program for biomass and for capturing some of that energy. So I think your suggestions are very good, and we'll circle back with them to see if there's something we can include in that particular policy or program addressing that with regard to Marin Sanitary Service.
Great, thank you.
Well, yeah, really quick, Barry, I would say interesting on the fire roads. I know sort of at the county level, the state right now through, I think it's Department of, or the Bureau of Forestry is looking at road fire standards for subdivisions and sort of expanded projects, but they haven't, I'm not aware that they've looked at more of the infill or infrastructure. But I do think if on the horizon, if they're looking at expansion going into this area, I would think in the near future, they'll start looking at these kind of roads that have limited access. So keeping that on the horizon, I think, is really critical, because there seems to be a community sentiment, and as well, this will likely come up, I imagine, at least on a statewide level for what cities will be doing for these little islands of kind of limited access for certain fire and safety. So no one else? We are chapter 12.
Okay, and chapter 12 is arts and culture. You heard a number of comments from the public on this element this evening. Couple of the commenters mentioned the need to move from policy to reality, and how do we get to seeing some action and some tangible results from these policies. A couple of things I wanted to mention, and one is, and this is something we talked about with our focus group, is to create an arts master plan for San Rafael. The County of Marin did an arts master plan recently, and the first question we posed at our focus group was, well, if the county has an arts master plan and a lot of that energy is focused on San Rafael, do we need a city arts master plan? And everyone said, yes, we do. We need an arts master plan, or if nothing else, we need an arts strategic plan, something that takes what really is about 8 or 9 pages of fairly aspirational general language about the future of the arts, and makes it real and makes it more tangible and provides some action. So I would say that it is important to follow through on that action within this plan. We put it up front of the element for that reason. Couple of other comments about public art. We do have a public art policy in here. We don't get kind of into the details about how to expedite a permit application, which I know one of the speakers mentioned, but those are the kinds of issues that might be addressed in a master plan. I think I mentioned earlier the importance of culturally inclusive arts programming, and really looking at the economic contribution of the arts to the city, and celebrating that, really providing space for the arts and arts special events and so on. So I would stop there, and again leave it to the commission for any comments, follow up, or questions on that topic area.
I'll jump in. Last go round, there were the same concerns or same desires to have some type of a standalone committee or commission to support the arts, and that would be their goal. And at the time, we almost folded it into Park and Arts Commission. In terms of Park and Rec, they're a standing commission now that exists, and it would broaden their charge a little bit. It would take probably some effort to fold in some commissioners to the recreation element of it and the parks element of it. But it was almost, it didn't happen, but there were a couple of meetings and discussion about it. So that might be a thought. I don't know what the present condition of Park and Recs are, but in terms of a commission and an acting body, or always DRB/arts. That's a joke. Love Design Review Board. Stay on. Anyway, that's all I got. Just a little history there.
And I'll respond to that too. There was, there have been a couple of public comments at council meetings too, to create an arts commission or an arts board of some kind. I think in general, we're trying not to create new commissions at a time where the city is really financially constrained. So that's something that maybe could be revisited in a few years, but at this point in time, we're not including a recommendation to create a new commission on the art for the arts. Maybe expanding an additional an existing commission is an idea.
Yeah, Commissioner Provatali, please.
Yeah, I really like this section. I like all the sections. So thank you very much again. Great job. I just have one comment or suggestion. It's AC 1.6C, central performance spaces. So I love the idea of having more central performance spaces in the city, particularly outdoor spaces. And I noticed that downtown San Rafael and also North San Rafael, the North San Rafael Town Center, the Northgate Mall were mentioned, and was really happy to see that. I was wondering if it may be worth mentioning Canal, if there's not already an outdoor central performance space there, and also Peacock Gap. And then I'm also wondering if it may be worth, talking about adding an outdoor performance space, even small, but given the space requirements to most parks, and if we can reach agreement on turning some of the schoolyards into parks, potentially adding some performance spaces there on the city's dime in collaboration with the school districts. We have so many musicians and actors in this area. It would be great to see more spaces for outdoor performing arts. And then just one other last thought and nuance. And I know, being a former musician, I would say, amateur musician, electric power is really hard to bring in to outdoor spaces. And oftentimes you have to bring in a generator, which has lots of emissions. And so it'd be great to actually provide those spaces with electric power, if possible as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? No? I really like this section, Barry. I think this is a huge cross component. I mean, this is a crosswalk with so many other areas. And I do think, if not a commission, a specific plan, either tied off or tiered off of what the county's doing would be really helpful. Because this addresses some really good high level. As Commissioner Lubomirsky said earlier, I mean, this is what we're intending to do, but I think there's just huge voids of implementation that can be utilized in this section, and it tags into so many others. But I thought it was really interesting, really good. Okay, if no one else, we'll move on.
Great. Okay, so the economic vitality element, again, this is a carryover of the 2020 plan's economic vitality element. We reorganized it a bit. I would say we strengthened and maybe emphasized more the idea of partnerships between the city and the business community, and the importance of working with our development and commercial real estate community in this, and understanding some of the issues around development and the feasibility of development in the city. I think we were going pretty strongly in that direction when the pandemic hit, and a lot of repositioning of our policies and rewriting of the text to recognize the needs of our small local businesses, and really kind of take a step back and think about the future of retail in the city. A lot of the changes that are happening, we anticipated would happen over 20 years, and they happened in 20 days in some cases, where, all retail went online, and, a lot of vacancy and shutdown and business challenges. So there's some very real serious challenges that I think we only begin to address in this section, that are going to need a lot more work in the future. Again, looking at some follow-up planning work on recovery and adapting some of our spaces, including office space. This is another area where post-pandemic we were really kind of counting on some pretty significant office growth, particularly downtown, around the station area. Don't know really what the market's going to look like for that long term. So I think this is an area where we have a policy framework, but there's a tentative quality to it, and we will need to revisit some of this in the coming years, particularly when we get into the policies under Goal 2. which is where we kind of break it down by sector and we start looking at, retail and office and hospitality and so on. I think, again, I brought this up last time, which is industrial land. There's a very strong policy statement in this plan about preserving industrial land with some very limited exceptions. For example, adjacent to a smart station or a high quality bus, the downtown bus terminal and so on. But for the most part, we don't want housing in the industrial areas. And that's a policy statement that is reiterated here and in the land use element. Workforce housing is a really high priority that's expressed in this element. The need for housing across all income groups and retaining the housing that we have and that serves our lower income workforce, I think, is another important priority here. So again, I'll turn it back to the commission for thoughts, comments, or feedback on either those comments or the policies.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on this one, Barry. So I do appreciate the sector-based breakdown. I think that's really helpful to kind of outline the current state thinking. One thing that I did notice though, and this is also kind of related to the equity piece and some of the goals that are outlined in equity, particularly around providing more wraparound support and services for lower income members of the community to kind of bridge some gaps. And I think that one critical piece that's kind of omitted within the economic vitality piece altogether is around labor force and household income. And I think specifically with regards to the different industries and sectors that we're looking to promote, I think there's a little bit of an inconsistency between some of the goals and sort of the realistic things that need to happen to achieve some of those equity goals, and what we're really talking about in terms of the goals that we outlined, particularly with goal 2 in section 2, or in the policies that are sort of outlined in that particular section. So I think one of the big pieces is there's a really big emphasis on retail, and in fact, most of the data around industry growth and sort of tax revenue is almost entirely centered on retail. And we can see from the data that's provided, even within the document itself, that retail-based sales tax has basically flattened out. And this started happening even before the recession started, right? I think what it also points to, and this is something that we've run into, I think this was actually covered at length when I think there was that Costco Northgate Mall project where they were talking about some of the community surveys that were done, the types of retail that local residents would like to see, which was primarily much more high-end retail than what's there. And the reality of how San Rafael is just not right now an attractive destination for that high-end retail, specifically because of what I can assume to be sort of a lack of actual spending that would sort of match the costs to sustain that kind of high-end retail. So like we're not really a center for the high-end retail traffic. We already have, Corte Madera, that's a little bit further south. There's already San Francisco. And, if people really want to get, certain other brands, you go out to Walnut Creek, for example, and there's Neiman Marcus and all those kinds of things. Right. So, so I think this is where I come back to, this is where I wanted to see a bit more explicit metrics around this, because I think it would actually really help outline some of the uncertainty that you've outlined around, we're not really sure how retail is going to shake out. But I think if we had some clear numbers around, realistically, for example, if we want to increase equity within our community, it really comes down to income, right? Given the fact that brick and mortar has gotten eviscerated by the pandemic, it's not going to come back to where it was. And even before, you could see that the city's revenue from this was flattening, and that the income from those jobs did not keep a pace even with market rate rents, much less purchasing, right? And reality, the ability to purchase is ultimately what's going to drive equity in the community more than any other measure that we try to do. Is can people actually afford to buy into their houses? That means that we have a higher base of people actually paying property tax, so that they actually have a greater sort of stake and strength in the local school. So there's a whole chain effect there. But if we don't address the fact that we're not really creating jobs that are going to pay higher, that will enable people to spend more in retail locally, but then also buy properties instead of just renting and then having to cram we saw was in the equity section, it was 4+ per household versus 3 and 2 in the rest of the city. So that's where I think that again, I'm going to keep coming back to I understand that there are other pieces of policy that are going to outline some of these things, but I think that the section 2 where we have our recommendations, we really need to be clear about we don't have anything to do with jobs and the types of jobs and how much they pay, and I think that's an important component. And that itself is going to lead to realistically, what are the types of sectors where the growth is that we really need to see there. It's obviously not going to be retail, but we spend the most amount of, it looks like, data and energy sort of looking at, okay, what do we do with retail? Because I can see it's historically been sort of the staple of sales tax and the business community. But I do think that we need to make it a community goal to say, we need to be able to attract businesses that do have higher income. It doesn't have to be tech companies. It can be other sort of higher end professional services, specialty doctors' offices, alternative primary care services, things like that. Because I think that will also provide a little bit more clarity into the industrial use, because right now it's super ambiguous. We just say we want to preserve more land for industrial use, but what does it currently contribute to the economic base of the city? From an employment perspective, from a sales tax perspective, et cetera. I think we just need to have more clarity. I know there are other documents, and I believe that Commissioner Hill suggested that, perhaps it's just a simple matter of explicitly noting, in this document, okay, where can we find these other documents that sort of touch on these areas in more depth? That could be it, and that could satisfy everything that I'm kind of poking at in terms of just using this as the glossary or the index for the jumping off point. But I think in any case, I think we really do need to have more clarity on the policy, the goal number 2, in terms of economic vitality, to have a really clear goal around what types of industry sectors we really need to start promoting and what is the expected income of that on the city. So why are we promoting this type versus this type?
Thank you. Anyone else? Sure. Commissioner Profanity.
Yeah, I just had one comment, and this is a great section. Also, there's so much great work here, so much depth. But I just wanted to hone in on one thing. It's EV 3.4 water dependent businesses. And this kind of relate to what I mentioned before about redeveloping the canal district. I'm just wondering if you think it may be feasible to eventually create some walking malls, kind of like the San Antonio River Walk in the canal area, that would create new businesses down there, new restaurants and whatnot, but also at the same time mitigate sea level rise and prevent flooding. Maybe combine both of those efforts or all of those efforts to revitalize the community, bring in new businesses, possibly bring in tourism, but also mitigate sea level rise. Has that been considered?
And Paul, you may want to chime in on this too. I think as part of the adaptation planning that's going to be done in the future, we're going to look at what land use changes might happen along the waterfront and along the canal waterfront, and maybe in conjunction with rebuilding levees or reconstructing levees. But we acknowledge there are opportunities to make some both design changes and land use changes in those areas. At the same time, we're reinforcing the, or hardening the shoreline for sea level rise. So, yeah, Paul.
Yeah, I think that's food for thought as we move forward, particularly in the canal neighborhood, where we, like the Northgate area, we have identified it as a priority development area for which we're going to be looking at and hoping to get funding for preparing a specific plan. So these are the types of details that we would look at building into a specific plan. So like I said, it's food for thought for moving forward. So.
Thank you.
I think that's really interesting in the specific plan. Yeah, this section's good. You know, I mean, honestly, I mean, I'll call it out. I think it's very hard to say economic vitality in this environment. So one of the things that's jumping out at me is what are going to be the check-ins on these goals? Because it's very hard to establish goals, as Commissioner Samutzi was saying, with when you don't have the data driving it, but really you don't know what the data is really, because everything is changing. So for me, what jumped out at me reading this was, well, what are going to be the check-ins? How will these be adjusted in the next 20 years as is what maybe our current reality becomes a long-term reality? And since there is such a heavy component on retail and maintaining certain industrial, I think it's important on the messaging from the city to identify when this will be checked in, how this will be rebalanced as community needs change. Any other commissioners, any other thoughts? No? Okay.
Okay, great, thank you. So the last element we'll be talking about this evening is the equity, diversity, and inclusion element. Again, even if we didn't have to do this because of SB 1000, I think it's a really important addition to the plan. It just really looks at the city with a different lens, one that really hasn't been used before in general plans, and uses data to kind of create this picture of San Rafael that does show a pretty significant pocket of, there's a disadvantaged community, to create those policies that look at healthcare issues and housing issues and workforce development issues and education and access to the internet, and really, I think, lay it out in a, in a comprehensive way and say, these are priority areas for future development. We do have a PDA designation that provides, I think, some leverage for doing future planning work, particularly in the Canal neighborhood. I won't go, into detail on the policies or programs here, but I think it was significant that we began a Spanish language engagement program as part of General Plan 2040. And what we learned from that is there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and that's the beginning of an engagement process that really needs to amp up in the coming years, and expanding the city's potential to do that. There's a lot of education involved, a lot of how do we engage in public processes and have an impact that is embedded in this element. I think the idea of equity-driven budgeting and investment in capital improvements is also something that comes across in this element that's important, and that really the city has already moved in that direction, but this formalizes it to some extent and says, yes, when we do budgeting, we are going to prioritize areas that have not had their share of investment and improvement in the past. So to me, it's a really important part of the plan to lay the groundwork for that. I also want to add that probably the most critical equity issue that we deal with in this element is one that we're not dealing with in the general plan as a whole this year, because it's housing. And so this, in some ways, a lot of the ideas that are expressed in this element really need to be fleshed out further in the housing element, where I think we can get much more specific about what programs the city will develop to reduce displacement and housing conditions in existing housing units, to deal with things like overcrowding, and to remove some of the barriers for affordable housing production in the city. So this is a start, and it's the first time the city has had a component like this in the general plan. It's not meant to solve everything, but it elevates an issue and begins that discussion that's going to happen in the future. And with that, I'll pause for questions or comments.
Sure, Commissioner Hill.
Yeah, I had three. I'll just do it in rapid succession, more like questions, just see if it ever came up during the focus or the committees when they met. Was there consideration for providing a stipend for elected positions? I think it's self-explanatory, but I'll just mention it. As of right now, they are not compensated, and I think that may disenfranchise, some communities that can't easily consider going for positions like that without some compensation. So let's see if that was explored. Number two, I think this is covered, but I just want to make sure it didn't show up in the EDI sections. Just want to see if it's here. But ensuring that disaster preparedness and communications are provided in Spanish and even other languages for the sake of public safety. And then this is a one case that's happened recently, but it could be spanning between the arts element and this element, which is that in light of the Black Lives Matter mural at the bridge at the intersection of Las Galinas and Freitas in Terralinda, is there consideration for a policy to explore providing for sanctioned, alternative approaches for sanctioned expression? I know I could probably go into that in some detail, but I think that there could be more instances where we want to leverage the EDI and the arts elements to kind of support. I mean, it's not about specificity, but really leaning into that commission, like a commission, if not a new one, then an existing one, to consider these types of issues so that they can be kind of resolved. And I know the city got kind of caught in the middle of needing to enforce a policy around making sure you're cleaning, public areas. But I think that this would allow, for an alternative to having to follow a strict policy there. So those are my three.
Yeah, and I can respond just quickly to a couple of those. The stipend, well, we didn't consider stipends for elected positions, but there is acknowledgement in the text of the need for stipends or the importance of stipends for participation in what we might otherwise call volunteer activities. I mean, even for the survey work that was done as part of this, our consultants said we need stipends. We can't do this without stipends for some of the participants. And so there is some language which recognizes that and talks about that. And then the disaster preparedness in Spanish is in the safety element. So we do address that. Yeah, and the commission idea is an interesting one. I think that's not something that's in the plan right now, but could be considered.
Go ahead, Paul. Before we
one comment regarding community expression and the whole Black Lives Matter issue with regard to Las Galinas and Freitas Parkway. There is a separate effort that's being done to take a look at the possibility of some sort of a community expression like platform or area or whatever. But I think it may happen separate from our general plan, but we'll look to see how it dovetails with the general plan and whether or not we need to include a program in there. It may happen before the general plan, but we'll see. So I did want to acknowledge that.
Commissioner Prevatelli?
Oh yeah, I was just going to mention, I'm glad Commissioner Hill, you brought up that the incidents on Freitas with that mural, because I think it made it clear that we have racism in our community, unfortunately. No big surprise. And actually, it was, it was kind of a surprise to me that there is potentially so much racism. And I'm just wondering if it may be appropriate to include in this section a, how should I describe this? Like an outreach program for people who are racist, to try to convince them not to be racist anymore. I'll just leave it at that. I don't know how better to say that, but it would be great to combat racism in some way, in a constructive way here, with city funding.
I'll jump in. I think it's a long overdue section of our general plan. I think it's needed. I think it's there's nothing you can do to make it as comprehensive as some of us would like it to be, but it's a reflection of our community's desire for racial equity, for inclusion, for all the things we strive to be as a community. I don't know how you codify that as a government, but I think it's a great section, and I think it's a start, and I think we can build from it. But I think it's great it's included, and I think we need to be true to it, and work on it, weekly, monthly, annually.
Yeah, I just want to add that I'm really encouraged to see this section, and I really enjoyed reading it. One thing that it's more of a question than a comment, but some of the things that Commissioner Previtali brought up earlier with like approaching the Canal District as like an art center, or allowing for redevelopment that would make it a more desirable place for businesses, and basically making it an art center or a business center in our community. I think that what we can do is really celebrate the canal for what it is, and we can help raise that area to be very vibrant. But as you mentioned, housing is a huge issue, and that's really at the heart of a lot of these equity issues. There was one section about preventing displacement, and that really, I guess that's where my question lies. Like, where of the discussion, or have there been discussions about really trying to address some of the equity and housing stability issues, and how to balance that with like gentrification? And making sure that we're, by trying to improve some of the living conditions for the most underserved, we're not really just displacing them and pushing them out.
I agree. That's very important.
To be honest, I'll go on the record and say I don't think that that's possible to like redevelop the canal and not have displacement. I mean, just look at the cost of land, right? It's not economically feasible for a developer to come in and do a redevelopment project, sink all that money in, and then say I'm going to keep the rents, at the same level that they are right now.
Yeah, I'll say one of the things that is interesting about the canal is that it's pretty much all market rate housing, that there really is not, subsidized housing or housing that's operated by large nonprofits and so on. And one of the opportunities that we observe in the element is maybe buying some of the market rate housing and converting it to affordable housing that's income restricted. Something I think the Canal Alliance is really interested in doing. And so I think the seed is planted here for that. There's a lot more in the housing element to be developed. In a way, it's good that we did it in this sequence, because the seed is planted here, and then the strategies and the programs, I think, can be fleshed out more when that element is put together. Paul, do you want to add to that?
I certainly do, and it's separate from the discussion of this element in the general plan, because you will have an opportunity to review an informational report. I believe it's your next meeting when you're going to be looking at our inclusionary housing requirements. The Canal neighborhood is identified as an opportunity zone. This is a federally designated zone that targets certain census tract areas that are ripe for potential renovation, redevelopment, things of that nature. And of course, there's a major concern that when you create a zone like this, that it has the potential for displacing people, because it provides an opportunity for property owners to come in, renovate their property, get some tax breaks, and displace others. And there's been a lot of discussion of this at the city council level. You're going to be getting a report on this at, like I said, at one of your upcoming meetings. So, you might want to hold your thoughts on that, because there are a couple of things that we're looking at as safeguards for the residents that live in the Canal neighborhood, in the event that there's potential for new investment, renovation, and displacement. So, and again, that's a separate discussion. It is linked back to this element, but it is an effort that's being done separately by the city. So I just want to make sure you guys are aware of that.
Thank you, Paul. Just to follow up on that question as well, I was encouraged to see in the Friday report that the code enforcement positions are looking to be filled. And I think there was a recent article in the IJ, or I don't know where I read it, where there were some code enforcement issues with an apartment building in the canal. And I just wonder what the take is and how it had to fold into the general plan of really kind of having more accessible tenant rights and making sure that our owners in those areas are actually keeping the standard of their buildings to a level that's livable.
Okay. Actually, you know what? That's a very good comment. We have had in place for several decades now an apartment inspection program where we proactively go out to apartments and we check for basic code compliance issues, for livability and habitability. Again, it's proactive. We have a cycle. We have many, many apartment units to inspect throughout the community. We have imposed and allowed for what's called can't remember the term, but it allows a tenant to file a complaint if there's issues about their apartments. Again, that's a separate track, but anything you could do in this particular element, it's already addressed in the housing element, that would help reinforce tenant rights is certainly welcome. So,
yeah.
Good comments.
I got 2 minutes of your time. History guy, a history of the canal. It was once a very desirable singles place when it was created. People moved from Tiburon, Belvedere, Mill Valley to live in the canal. Okay. Vietnam War happens. Boat people and people sympathetic to the American government are flown to Hamilton Air Force Base. And they show up and looking for a place to live. Multiple families in one apartment. That's where the canal, as you know, there was not much diversity at all. Then there were a bunch of revolutions in Central America. We go through the Salvadorian phase, Mexican phase, okay? And it's kind of morphed into from Vietnamese, Laotian to Central American, El Salvadoran, Mexican. And now it's, I mean, this is what I've seen anyway since I've lived here, is now it's all Guatemalan. The kids I have at San Rafael play on my football team, almost all Guatemalan, a couple Mexicans. But the idea is San Rafael is a very tolerant place. If the number of people living in a small space, if you will, would not be allowed in a lot of places south of us, let's just say that. There would be compliance issues. There'd be neighbors who would be upset. And it isn't, the canal's cheap. It's just more people live in a smaller space. So I think, the city's got to be applauding Paul. And it's been, we try and walk that line between code compliance and health and safety and things like that. I think the city does a really good job, and it's a great community. It is a vibrant community. It is a family community. It's all those things you want in a community. So the city, I think, has done a pretty good job to maintain that, because there aren't many places in the county that allow this. I mean, look at, we're trying to get one little hotel in a southern Marin city, and they're losing their mind. And Nevada, same way. So, I mean, I think we, I don't want to pat our back, but I think we do a pretty good job by the people in need and housing and things like that. So we can always do more, but I think, and it is expanding. I mean, there's spots now on Nova Albion. I have a number of students at Terra Linda who were living on Nova Albion, and which would never, 10 years ago wouldn't happen, but now it's starting to happen. So it's not, there's no Section 8 housing. There's no, it's just the changing of the times and changing of the neighborhoods, and it's all good. But I just want a little history there for you.
Oh, thanks. That's really interesting. Anyone else? Super interesting chapter. I would just, a couple of things that jumped out at me is, and I think on what Commissioner Luberski was just indicating, I think there are some general assumptions. So props to the team for putting this together, because I don't think there's a script. This is totally new. But I do think there's terminology used that we should be sensitive and careful about. There's interplay between Hispanic and Latino, and I think we should be there. Clear definitions if we're talking census tracking or certain terminology. And then I think when doing that too, a sensitivity, or at least a mindfulness of who are we grouping together? Because really there's an undertone from my experience here that a lot of folks in the canal just feel like they are kind of just grouped as this community and the other side. And so I think to avoid that, breaking that down to whatever nationality we can, I think would be really helpful. It may be a big ask. I don't know if we have the data, but I do think it would help. Again, I don't know if there's legality issues or not on that, but if it can be explored, I think it will help define the community and sort of the sub communities that lie within it that would validate them and enhance their inclusion into this discussion. And then the last thing too, I didn't see is really sort of from the inclusion standpoint, citizenship status. And again, if legally this is fine, I would encourage adding that into the inclusion, that regardless of your citizenship status, there's an inclusion in that, or at least a lens incorporating that into it. I think that would help. But I thought this was, props to you guys. This is a really challenging, difficult, and there's huge overlays with other chapters and the housing element in itself. So really compliment, but also really challenging. And I do think there's still some work that needs to be done in this chapter. I think it needs to be fleshed out a little bit more. This is another area of, could there be a specific plan or a subcommittee or commission to really look at that? And I would challenge the city to think about, putting its money where its mouth is to actually explore that. One of the key things I think here is eliminating kind of the freeway separation between that part of the city and the canal. And this is really the way to do it, I think. So challenging more of the inclusion, because I think that was there, but I really think that could be enhanced out a little bit more. And then some of that specific terminology, just being mindful as to how we can or should define that. But no, I mean, great job. I love that it's included. It's tackling a really complicated, long history. So Commissioner Luberski, I love that background. I didn't know all of that. Anyone else?
One if I could add to that, just for, you mentioned for the sake of inclusion, I know we didn't include any sexual orientation or gender identity language in there. I think it would be worthy to consider that as well. I know a lot of our surrounding cities go to great lengths to that. I think we can be inclusive with that language as well.
Yeah, great point. Last call. Barry or Paul, any other thoughts, questions, or guidance we can work on?
Well, I would just jump in with what to expect for December 15th. So we will not, at that point, have all of the text edits made. Obviously, there's a lot of information to absorb. But what we will do by that time is provide an approach for how we're replying to both the written comments that have come in specifically, itemized, and to the commission's comments. You've given us a lot to think about at the last meeting and tonight. The one I'm going to have to chew on the most is the metrics one. So that's that's the most challenging in some respects, because it's kind of shifting the general plan a bit. But I think we can do something that addresses the issue that's been brought up. So we'll be coming back to you on the 15th of December to go through that. Probably a similar format to this. Again, continued public comment opportunity at that meeting, and we'll keep going forward. We're hoping that at that meeting we can also bring to you a presentation, or at least a preview on the downtown precise plan, which I think does dive a little deeper into some of the things we've talked about by addressing a specific defined area of the city with land use regulations. So, yeah. And I just want to appreciate the conversation this evening. I think we got some really good feedback from both the public and from the commissioners.
Yeah, thank you, Barry, for all the hard work.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks to you and the team. Great. Okay, so then I think we will close this item for tonight, and with the plan to continue it for the December 15th hearing. And since there's no action to be needing to be taken tonight, we'll move on to the director's report.
Hi there. Thank you. I have just a few things to say, and then
Ellie, can I
to mention that Rafi's got.
Ellie, can I jump in really quick?
Oh yeah.
Just back to that item, it would be helpful to actually get a motion to continue the matter to December 15th and incorporate your comments.
So moved.
Thank you, Rafi. Do we have a second?
Second.
Allie, do you want to take a roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Hill.
Yes.
Commissioner Lubomirsky.
Yes.
Commissioner Privatali.
Yes.
Commissioner Saudi.
Yes.
Vice Chair Samuzzi.
Yes.
And Chair Mercado.
Yes. Great, thank you. Thanks again, Barry. Thanks, Paul, and everyone else that was involved. Really appreciate it. See you guys in December. Look forward to the continued discussion. And thank you, Rafi, for clarifying. So we have that. Okay, so now we'll move back to director's report.
Great, thank you. I do have a few things to say, and then Rafi mentioned he wanted to say a couple things as well. I wanted to start by reminding everyone that next week on Tuesday, the 17th, is another Planning Commission meeting. This is a rescheduled meeting since we've had to reschedule some of our meetings because of Thanksgiving and Christmas. So the second November meeting falls on the 24th normally, and because of furloughs and Thanksgiving, we're not going to be having a meeting that week. So again, that meeting is being rescheduled to November 17th. I also wanted to mention that we Planning and Building open today for walk-in services. We will begin operating Tuesdays and Thursdays for now from 8:30 to 12:30 for walk-in services. We still encourage our community members to try to use our online permitting systems. We also have been operating a virtual counter system, and encourage our community members to continue to use that. But I did want to mention that we have started to open on for walk-in services. And then one last thing I wanted to mention is, as you all probably have heard by now, I am sad to report that Rafi Beloyan has accepted a job offer with the city of Dixon. And so he is leaving the city. Rafi's been with the city for 20 plus years, I believe. And he has, in those years, moved up in the ranks. He started as an assistant planner and moved on over the years and demonstrated a commitment to the community and to public service, and is leaving the planning management job for a community development director job in Dixon. I've had the benefit of working with Rafi for the past decade or longer. I've worked as a contract planner with him, and now I have been working as his direct report. And Rafi he's just actually great, a mentor. He has encouraged my growth over the years. has spent a lot of time showing me the ropes. I think I see Rafi as thinking beyond himself, beyond what his little circle of learning, and really thinks about what his actions, how his actions will affect others. He takes a lot of time in making sure that we all are aware of what's happening and that he doesn't leave anybody hanging. A perfect example is the scripts that he has created for this planning commission meeting. He spent a lot of time putting those together, and it has made these planning commission meetings run really smoothly. And I personally appreciate it. I know that others appreciate it as well. I think one thing that I wanted to mention is something that Rafi mentioned a while ago, and he mentioned that how much he really enjoys the planning commission meetings, being the liaison for the planning commission meetings. I think he actually said that this is probably one of the jobs that his tasks that he loves the most about his job. And I thought you all should know that. And I know that he really appreciates this team. This planning commission team is amazing, and he has said so. So lastly, I just wanted to say congratulations, Rafi, and I thank you for everything you've done for us, for me, for our team, and we're all going to miss you.
Thank you. Thanks, Allie. Those were really nice words. Yeah, it's 20 years is a long time, especially on top of that, it's also working in a town that I grew up in from 2 years old to 20 years old. So spent a lot of time in the Terralinda neighborhood, so know this community very well. And but it was time to, find something else, keep fresh. And, I'm going to have a closer commute and a promotion and just kind of a different type of planning. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm excited. Allie was partially right when she said my favorite part of the job was working with the commission. It was actually the commissions before this commission. I do. Working with the planning commission is always refreshing for me because it's an opportunity for us to kind of get some feedback and checks and balances on stuff. And what I always equate it to is a lot of times we get into the weeds and trenches on projects. And sometimes coming to the commission, you hear the bigger picture, which is always helpful to us and for the planners to understand kind of what the policy direction is. So we really appreciate that. I have to say that we've had a lot of different commissioners over the years, and we've been blessed with very strong commissions. And it's just amazing the amount of work and time and effort and that you put into reviewing the reports, reviewing the documents is, I don't think the public understands that this is, that you are volunteers and that the level of detail and scrutiny that you put into these documents is amazing. And we appreciate that. It makes the community a better place. It helps us as staff. It helps the community, it helps the council. So it's very appreciated. And I think each one of you bring something special, and that's what's great. Different perspective, a different part of the community, a different slice of the pie, which is really helpful for us to hear all those connections. So it's that's my big thanks. We've got a great staff. We've got great great council, great city manager and community development director. So we're lucky to have all that. And I would say that thank you. Thank you for your input. Thank you for your advice. Some of you I've known for 20 years from General Plan 2000 Steering Committee. One of my first days here, I went to a steering committee meeting and Mr. Lubomirsky was there as chair and vice chair. So, and some of you I've just met more recently, and just the level of what you bring is really just kind of eye-opening to me. And I hope our community understands what service you're providing. So thank you. I'm going to miss everybody. I'm excited, sad. I'm in the sad mode lately, nervous, just a lot of emotions going on right now. But I will be here on Tuesday as well. Next Tuesday, that'll be my last meeting. And then my last day will be on December 1st. And then I'll be starting my new position on December 7th. So thank you.
Thank you. Congrats.
let me jump in. I've known you. You had hair back then. It's been a good long time. I want to thank you because you always, you've got some pressure on you to represent the city and the interests of the city, and sometimes they're in conflict with maybe what a neighborhood or a homeowner might feel. And I always thought with you, you gave your opinion using your experience, using the codes, I always thought you were like one of those guys down the middle, and that's tough sometimes to represent the city and its interests, and also the neighborhood as kind of, we're the neighborhood people, obviously, but I mean, and your attention to detail. I mean, things are always where they should be, and it's been a real pleasure. And I caution you, you may be back. You never know. You think you leave, then they keep sucking you back. So Dixon short term, but don't buy a house. But yeah, it's been wonderful working with you. I really enjoyed it, and I'll keep in touch. All right.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, Rafi, for everything. A lot of guidance over my time here, like in every capacity, and it goes very much appreciated. So congrats. That's a hard act to follow. Any other updates or?
That's it.
No, we're all just, still feeling it. Well, great meeting tonight. Congrats again, Rafi. I'm glad you'll be here on Tuesday, so people think of your stories and jokes, and however we can roast him on his goodbye. I think Commissioner Lubomirski's got some good ones, so dig deep into those. And I think we'll call the meeting out at 9:40. Meeting's adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.